Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sally Buzbee, Executive Editor of The Washington Post, and I'm really delighted to be here today for a session on workplace learning and training. The new demands of the global economy are obviously changing the way we work. There is a report by the World Economic Forum that says that half of all employees around the world will need new or different skills to do their jobs by 2025. And the shelf life of most skills that workers have is 5 years, only 5 years. So we're going to take a look today at what employers should be doing to handle this new environment. My guests today, to help us try to sort this out, are Ashish Advani, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of JA Worldwide, Ebru Özdemir, who is the Chairperson of the Board of Limak Holding, and Judith Weiss, who is the Chief People and Sustainability Officer and a member of the Managing Board at Siemens. So welcome to all three of you, and thanks so much. Judith, I wanted to start with you, if that's okay. What are some new and innovative approaches that workplaces can use to retrain workers, and how do we scale those? If you could address that.
Yeah, very, very interesting question, and one that is obviously very topical for us as well. Maybe let me take a step back and say, when we look at learning, we look at what the organization needs in terms of capabilities first. So we've developed a methodology that allows us to do a good piece of diagnostics at a site level, function level, business unit level, where we have a look out for the next 3 to 5 years, and we're trying to understand what capabilities are actually needed. How much of that talent is actually to be found internally, externally, so how good is the local labor market, what are some of the demographic shifts coming up. And once we know that, we're translating that into learning paths for individuals. So we're trying to break down the big headline of talent scarcity and upskilling need into real roadmaps for different job profiles, of which we have many in Siemens, given that we're quite a diversified conglomerate, if you like, technology company. And what we have then done is we've created a learning platform that really works like a platform business. So internal, external people can really upload learning offerings there. We've obviously, through the pandemic, gone extremely virtual and digital over the last 2 years. We now have about 230,000 of our 300,000 people online. We've got about 120,000 learning units in there. But I think the bigger question is, how do you actually match that offering with people's needs? And some of that we push almost strategically. Questions of leadership, digitalization, sustainability. Those are strategic learning topics for us that we almost push, top down. And then we've gotten rid of a classic performance management system and installed growth talks, so that at an individual level, people actually get some advice on what it is that is relevant for them. And on top of that, we have some clever technology. So when I open up my computer in the morning, it tells me how much learning I've already done this year. And I get some suggestions as well in terms of what I should be doing. So those are some of the examples, and I can give a few more in the course of the conversation.
That's fascinating. So Ebru, as you're running a business, and as you're worrying about all the things that you worry about as you're running a business, the strategic agenda for the business, how do you elevate learning so that that is part of, I don't know, how you're evaluating managers, how you're thinking about your success going forward? How do you build this into the agenda, the strategic agenda of a business?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. This is exactly what we have been thinking since the COVID. I mean, the COVID changed our lives, and I'm coming from the industries that are the least digital in construction, energy, and we're in 15 different countries. Most of them are emerging or underdeveloped, so it was a big challenge. But we always say that, sometimes people say, okay, we have to get some incentives for the learning from the governments. And I'm like, we cannot wait everything from the governments. I mean, as private sector, we have everything. We are dynamic, we are capable, we have the resources. So we have to develop new skills by ourselves. So we have to be motivated for that. Now, and the other thing is we have responsibility to our shareholders. I mean, not only our shareholders, but our employees. Now I'm thinking our company, without our employees, we are nothing, basically. I mean, this is all we have. So whatever we do, whatever we achieve, we build the longest span bridge in the world. We did it with our employers. I mean, this wouldn't be possible even if we have all the equipment by ourselves. So therefore, now we are working a lot to increase the morale in the office. I mean, by online learning, by using the digitalization skills that we have achieved during the COVID period. My industry, as I said, was the least digital, and in one night we became like the digitalized companies. So we are trying for targeted professional development, educations and trainings, and the maintenance of the morale, we realize that it's very important. And morale of the employees is one of our business strategies. We changed the business strategy, we added that. I mean, we have to have the highest morale. And I say, you know, during the COVID, we didn't work from our offices, we work from outside. So be where you're happy. I want to work with people who are really happy, who are satisfied with what they're doing. And of course, the governments, it's nice to have, private sector loves incentives. It's good if you get their really support, but it's not very important. I always think that the private sector really is the forefront, governments generally follow it, so we have to force. Otherwise, if you look at each other and wait for something, then another COVID comes and another maybe a disaster comes or a conflict comes, that we just step where we are. So we have to really move on and develop new skills.
Thank you. Ashish, so your organization obviously focuses very heavily on youth empowerment, youth training. What sorts of mindsets or, I guess, attitudes do young people have to have? You know, everyone thinks, I go to school and then I work. But what we're talking about here is that learning is a lifelong. Are kids prepared for that? Are they horrified by this? Or how would you address that issue?
I'd say adults are horrified by it.
Yeah.
Kids are starting to realize this is the future. And my colleagues in the panel here, Judith really talked about skill set, and Ebru started talking about mindset, and both skill set and mindset are important. So while we can't only focus on skill building, and we can't only focus on building the kind of mindset that allows somebody to want to go online and do online education in the middle of their career to retrain, that's a tall order, right, to really ask somebody.
Yes.
So I think, how do we create that mindset in young people that allows them to almost want that as opposed to need to have that? And that is what JA has really been working hard to do through our programs around the world. And I will say, there's both ability and willingness, right? So for willingness to do it, it's about creating behaviors that young people have, whether it's something that you might want to call intellectual curiosity, or you might want to call it self-efficacy, which is another term which really means having the resilience to get through whatever's in your way and believe in yourself that you know you can change careers. So how do you build self-efficacy in young people? And a lot of our programs have, over time, become very focused on that core life skill. Now, I will say that when adults come into classrooms, because our programs get corporate volunteers, including Siemens, so when a Siemens volunteer would come in the classroom and tell their life story, what we find is the adults also, when they're teaching young people to have that self-belief, they themselves start to say, well, I need to have that growth mindset too. If I'm telling somebody else to not have a fixed mindset, I need to have a growth mindset. So it works for both the employee coming and motivating kids and being the mentor, and for the kids. So at least I've seen that behavior in what happens in the classroom. Now, I've talked about willingness. I do want to just, I think it's important to acknowledge there's also people who don't have the ability to retrain for either, inequality reasons, inequity reasons associated with wealth or gender or race. It is such an important topic today, and I think as we talk about willingness, we in equal breath have to talk about ability.
And how would we address that? What are the...
Well, I think, we've got to address, particularly in forums such as this, there's a role for government to play, there's a role for the private sector to play, there's all these new government incentive programs that actually allow subsidies for certain classes of employees to get, additional training. Also, I believe that universities now have started to expand into doing lifelong learning in a way that's changed the definition of what university is. So the idea of a university not charging a lot of money for a program that's lifelong learning oriented, I think that's becoming, frankly, part of the norm. And micro-credentials are now getting more accepted. So I think it's starting to happen, but I don't think it's happening fast enough for what we really need for society to prosper.
Okay, thank you. So Judith, talk a little bit about the pandemic and how that affected this whole area. Obviously, we all learned to work remotely. We didn't think we could, and then we discovered we could. And so that is in some ways, I think, probably a positive sign. That's for learning. I assume it changed a lot of behavior, but it also obviously created an enormous amount of stress and strain. Talk about how you think the pandemic affected both sort of the willingness for learning new skills, learning to do work in different ways, but also some of the challenges it provided.
Yeah. I think Siemens was one of the lucky companies who didn't suffer from a business perspective so much through the pandemic, and I think it makes a very big difference whether you work in a company that is fighting hard for survival or not. So I think we started off in a better place than maybe some others, and I think that's important to say because I think that does a lot around propensity for learning as well. What it did for us is, as I mentioned earlier, is we went very, very quickly from classroom concepts to digital formats, and luckily we had already started that journey, but that has really been an accelerator for us. And I think it's also tipped us into, anyway, a different form of learning. I think what happens today is people learn much more often in much smaller formats, so little learning nuggets. And the accessibility at a time when you want it obviously helps as well. And that has seen a huge uptick in people's learning. The other thing that we have done very much through the pandemic is really learn some life skills for the pandemic. Yeah? So some resilience techniques. Yeah? How do I literally survive through that? For line managers, how do I know manage a team virtually where I never had to do that before? So we also try to make things as relevant as possible at certain points in time. And what we have seen through some of our engagement surveys is that actually for us, engagement has gone up through the pandemic. And that's largely been on the basis of two things. One is people found that we were taking good care and that we went through this together. And the other thing is simply the flexibility and the trust that people have been given and that they want to see now. But if you have a look at the data, then clearly about 40% of people are contemplating changing jobs today. That's not Siemens data, that's external data. But at the same time, 77% want to work for an employer that is vested in their development. So I think there's also an opportunity to move into a very meaningful relationship with people and really get out of some of the transactional relationship so that there is a strong bond. Because if you look at things like the Edelman Trust Index, it is very clear that whilst talent mobility is high, people really trust their employer above any other institution with their lives and with issues. So I think there's also a huge opportunity to counter things like the Great Resignation through that.
And Ebru, have you found that? You mentioned obviously that you are, now building this into like employee satisfaction and things like that are part of the metrics of how you measure the company. Are you finding that training and things like that lead to greater loyalty, retention of employees? Do you think that, and how do you measure the financial impact of retraining employees?
First of all, we hope to. I mean, we definitely need to increase the loyalty. I think currently, as Judith also said, people would like to change jobs now, or they want to become entrepreneurs, or they want to totally change, even not the job, they want to change their lives, where they live, and so forth. So there's no one correct answer here, but what we are trying right now in all our companies, we are checking the retention statistics, how we are doing that. And I think at that moment, all private sector should help each other. We have to learn from each other how we can really retain our good staff or our talent. And the other thing is I really would like to see, like maybe from Siemens, also we can work with Ashish on how the companies who have done this very well, we can get some like personal testimonies, how the people, because now I realize that people would like to hear good stories, like testimonies from the success stories and how this was been possible in the good companies. We have been working with some universities on, as Ashish said, the lifelong learning programs. This is very helpful. And the accessibility, and we put some programs, short ones, because the span of the now attention has decreased. So we try to make it as short as possible. Plus, we're engineers. Most of the people we employ are engineers who are like, you have to give it in 2 minutes, whatever you have to, and then come to the answer, to the next. So it's very personable, it's very empathical, but we are really trying our way out here, and I really like to get the experience of the private sector as well.
So a lot of this conversation is obviously about things like engineers, but Ashish, I was wondering, you sort of touched on this a bit. For blue-collar workers, for frontline workers, for people who are in, lower-paying healthcare industries and things like that, they're also obviously going to need new skills going forward. It's sometimes perhaps harder for employers to see the value of that. Do you have any thoughts on this issue? Because I do wonder if there's if there's equity issues built in beyond the ones that you talked about, where people who are in higher skilled jobs will get more and more skill building, and people who are in lower skilled jobs will not get that assistance. Do you see that at all?
I think it's a real issue. Mm-hmm. I think there's so many dimensions of inequality and inequity, and that's another one. And I think particularly for that one, when we surveyed young people about what they actually want in their job, regardless of if they're heading down a TVET technical path, a vocational path, or an academic path, what we found is young people want creative control. And it's difficult, as you know, in your great companies to deliver creative control. So how do you design institutions and organizations to retain people who want to have some degree of agency in their life?
Yeah.
And that also, once again, on dimensions of inequality, gender, race, and type of work, you can create that agency as long as you really respect it and make it part of your value system. Mm-hmm. And I think we're on a journey in society to really value agency being shared as opposed to controlled by a few. Mm-hmm. So that gives me some degree of hope and optimism. I do think when we did the survey, we did this last year of young people, we did it with EY. We actually published it through the World Economic Forum. What we found is that when young people were able to have an entrepreneurial option within their company, it created value for the company, and it created value and choice for that young person. Mm-hmm. So how do you create institutions that are really networks, not hierarchies, that allow you to really expand your value proposition and keep those employees?
And do young people view training as choice, that it gives them more choice? I mean, is that like an emotional correlation that they make?
Not when you ask them when they're 18. So when they're 18, they're done with school, and they just want a job, and they want to do their own thing and not have a boss. I mean, that's like the wrong time to ask them that question. But I do think a bit later on in life, they start to appreciate that. And once again, only if they have the mindset of learnability. Manpower defined this term called learnability, which is the ability and willingness to learn. Mm-hmm. And it's so inexpensive to actually do a program for a young person. We're talking like a few dollars at scale to actually impact a young person's life by introducing them to a role model who's done exactly that, who has the same background as them. They're like, geez, if they switch jobs 8 times and they're successful, surely I can too. Mm-hmm. So let's not introduce young people to role models who are nothing like them, and they've got to think, oh, Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos, I'm nothing like them. So that's, I think, the real challenge, which, once again, I'm optimistic. I think it's actually achievable.
So in other words, you're talking about like the actual reality of work, and that can be exciting and fulfilling, and that. Do young people respond to that? Or are they like, I mean, we all remember career days and like, what do people actually do all day when they're grown up?
Yeah, so career days are sort of old-fashioned. The new thing is to actually do experiential learning and immersive learning where you leave school for the day. Okay. You don't have people come to you. You leave school for the day. You actually spend a full day in a company. And often it's your first time ever in a company. I mean, think of it. Except for what your parents do. If your parents were like taxi drivers, you've never actually been in a company. Mm-hmm. You see an air-conditioned office, and you meet people just like, what you were, and you start to think, I can be like that person, and I'm going to study chemistry and become a chemist. Yay, that becomes possible. So I see that as the future.
Okay.
But if may I chip in?
Yes, absolutely.
I do think that there is, maybe not at the age of 18, but I do think that there is a growing awareness, particularly if I think about, sought after talents that we also need, IT talents, digital talents. Mm-hmm. They're very aware of the shelf life of the skills that they have. So they have an inherent drive to learn. They want to be around other people, that rub off a bit of good learning and skill for them. There's a lot of community building around, software developers, for instance,
Yes,
who actually, work with and off each other in a way. So I think people do seek out those opportunities, and they actually are driven. And I think there's no coincidence that particularly these types of people leave jobs very often every 5 years. And I think that is very often down to the fact that they don't find the environment with their current employer that actually allows them to do that. So if you're able to design that in, and if you are able to give some of the freedom, then I do think that people, find that quite a compelling proposition in and of themselves.
So interesting. So in other words, retention can be sort of achieved through providing additional opportunities internally.
May I add to
Sabri,
this?
of course.
Because one of the biggest challenges we also have is to have these young people who has a totally different attitude, as Ashley said and Judith said, to put them in an environment to work and let them work with the people who are coming from the older generation. So we want them to do projects together, but the way they look at life or the job is totally different. So we are now thinking of some programs, how we can make this group of people to work together. So this, I think, is going to be the next challenge.
Multi-generational teams.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
really fascinating idea.
I think universities also, particularly ones that have been historically strong at co-op programs, they're trying to match young people with older executives to create that cross-pollination. It helps both parties. So like Waterloo and Northeastern University in Canada and the US, they were the originators, and now many universities, Stanford, Cornell, they're building these programs to really connect the dots between academia and vocational work in a much more concrete way with new labels.
Okay.
But we even see that within teams in Siemens. So
Right.
if I go back to your question about manufacturing environments, we actually even see that within teams, that the younger ones sometimes, teach the older ones on digital, and also here, I mean, we've found through the diagnostic methodology clear business cases that it is also worthwhile upskilling and reskilling, some of our more mature folks as well. Who then learn in parts from the younger ones.
Yes.
So the German kind of qualification and apprenticeship programs, we've done that for people who haven't been to school for 20, 30 years.
That's fascinating.
And there's been a very clear business case also in numbers behind that, in terms of how much that would cost us versus recruiting and laying off people who don't have a relevant skill set anymore.
Yes, indeed, because of course, recruiting and retention are taking up an enormous amount of people's
Absolutely.
energy right now. So
Exactly.
we would love to take questions from the audience at this point. This is a fascinating discussion with a lot of really great sort of real world examples and things like that. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand and we will take it. Otherwise, I've got plenty more questions I can pepper these folks with.
You're doing a great job.
Okay, thanks. So on a practical matter, what are the skills? What are the skills? What do people, when we're talking about reskilling and upskilling, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the ability to work in a digital environment, work online? Are we talking about everybody needs more linear algebra, as somebody said the other day in a session? Or what are we talking about? Let's go down the line and say, you all work in different places. What is needed?
Well, I mean, we're such a big company.
Many things are needed.
Many things, but clearly digitalization,
Okay.
and clearly the going from something mechanical to something that is that puts the sparkle of intelligence, digital into things. Yeah, whether that's frontline workers or whether that's more sophisticated, certainly is. But maybe also to your point, I think it's not just skills as in knowledge skills. I think it is also skills like resilience. Where we need to teach people to wanting to learn and to wanting to embrace change, because that is not going to go away. And that's why we tend to want to talk to people more about employability rather than job security as well.
Okay.
Because if you invest in your employability, hopefully job security is a result of that. But I think what you need to do is embrace change, because that's not going to go away, and have skills that help you to learn for a whole lifetime. And then it doesn't matter so much what exactly it is.
So you're essentially saying there's not some endpoint where you retrain people and then you're good for another 10 years. You're basically having to just actually create more of an attitude of it's okay for my job to change over time for what I do.
Well, I mean, you said it at the very beginning. If you have a shelf life of skills for 5, maybe even 10 years, that means my kids will have to reinvent themselves 5 to 10 times over. So I think teaching them skills that help them to stay sharp, curious, and that, give them the confidence to say, it doesn't really matter so much what comes. I feel equipped that I can learn the relevant things. I think is going to be inducing.
We do have a question from the audience, so I want to take that really quick, and then we'll go down the line.
Yes, Wolfgang Krach, I'm a journalist from Germany. So what I wanted to know that all of us had made the experience during the last 2 years that you can do work at home that we had never expected. So, and many people have the desire to work at home, and it's hard to get them back into the office. So my question is, what do you draw the consequences you draw for your companies, for the people who are working in offices? How did the pandemic change your idea of how people work and how, for example, office concepts work? So what are you planning to do?
Do you want to answer that? Obviously, you have people out at construction sites, but you also have a bunch of people in offices.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, in construction, of course, you have to be on the site. So, I mean, there's no way out of it. So they have to be on site. But on the offices, I mean, I tell people, don't come to the office. I mean, wherever you are happy and wherever you feel you are efficient, please work from there. Because as we're talking about retaining the talent, also this is an issue. I mean, they were home all the time. Now we want them to come back to the office. But the young people, they like to socialize. So even if I say, like, don't come, they want to come because they want to socialize. They would like to be a part of the team. So we do, like, now hybrid, like 2 days from home, 3 days from work, depending on how they are. But the other thing is we changed the travel habits. I mean, I went to Korea for a 1-hour meeting from Turkey. I mean, this was insane. So thanks to, I'm not doing that anymore. Of course, face-to-face meetings is great. I mean, being in Davos this year is great. But now we are more efficient and we plan better. So I thought that no online meetings are possible. Nothing, I mean, everybody has to at work, or the meetings should be around one table. This has been changed completely.
Okay. Ashish, you obviously deal with a lot of different companies all across the spectrum. This is one of the most complicated questions that many are facing. What are you finding? Any commonalities or?
So we're in 115 countries, and everyone's making decisions independently based on the laws, based on the behavior of their team. And I'll say the general conclusion, I would say, is hybrid is here to stay. And the range of whether you go fully virtual or 2 days a week or 3 days a week will vary not only by place you are, by what your team wants, but even by time of year. I mean, I think there's going to be so much fluidity in these policies that to say there's one standard model, I think that is probably gone. Those days are gone. Our partners, I think, equally are seeing, depending on their industry, such wide variety. And there's, once again, this problem of equity comes up because some teams need to be in the office.
Right.
And some teams work better flexibly. And how do you create a policy for both that treats, on gender lines, everyone fairly? It's very complicated.
Judith, do you want to weigh in on this? I mean, a big, sprawling company that has operations in many places.
No, I think there's not much more to add. What was really important for us is because people really valued the trust and the flexibility, and we wanted to send a clear signal that this was possible going forward. So we also advocated globally for a 2 to 3 days from anywhere policy. So we wanted to send the signal that we would give flexibility and trust, we would measure outcomes rather than presence, but at the same time, we do want people to come together. And we know, and I'm sure you've heard this many times before, we know for certain things, if you want to celebrate, if you want to innovate, etc., you need to bring people together. And the other thing is we wanted them to remember that they work for Siemens and not just any company from their kitchen counter. So,
and how do you do that? Right.
How do you do that? So, yeah, of course we want to bring people back.
A sense of mission.
A sense of mission, a sense of purpose, and a sense of team, because I think people want to belong at 2 different levels. I think they want, and we discuss purpose a lot these days, I think people do want to come to a place of work where they feel, I can contribute to something bigger on an everyday basis. But whether you feel that you belong is very often your immediate team environment. So how we solve that in a hybrid world, I think is still a big experiment to come, but I think that is going to be the magic going forward.
One quick more question. We're almost out of time, but we'd love to have another question.
You told us you want the people to have happy, but when they're in a job for a longer time, they get used to it. So how you can keep them motivated? Do you think about a rotation in the company? Do you do that? And what is the outcome?
Yeah, no, absolutely we do that. We rotate people and we encourage that as well, because we know that people learn probably 10% in a more formal setting, but really 70% of learning happens on the job and through experience. So I think exposing people to different things is going to be really important. Now, what's interesting is that people are actually less inclined to move internationally, is at least an indicator that we're getting. But on the other hand, if you can engage in projects that happen anywhere in the world, there's also an opportunity if you can do that virtually. So again, I think the jury's going to be out as to how some of these things really establish as new practices. But A, we see a lot of opportunity, and B, we're going to keep a pulse check as well to see what works and what doesn't work.
So before we close, just wanted to say this is actually one of the more optimistic panels that I've seen at this session. It's really exciting, some really fascinating ideas, both in terms of how companies are actually handling situations like this, and also, you know, technology allowing, as you said, Judith, just much more individualized learning. That's kind of I don't think that we have that many exciting, optimistic panels at this session, so it's kind of nice. So I want to thank all three of you for this wonderful panel, our online audience, and also the great questions that we got from this audience. And we did want to say that if you're following along on social, please hashtag WEF 2020. And thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent.